Hello, everyone, and welcome to Let's Talk About Brand. Whoops, there we go. And I am your host, as always, Christine Gritmon. I come on here and do this show every single Friday at 12 noon Eastern Time, live on Facebook, Twitter, and for now, Periscope, though Periscope is going away in April. So we'll have to see how it all works next Friday. But anyway, we are here every Friday at noon, wherever we are, talking about different elements of branding. Welcome to our replay viewers. Pop a replay in the comments if you are joining us after the live broadcast, and mark your calendar for Friday at noon Eastern Time, because I'm going to be here every single week. I also have a Twitter chat on Tuesdays called Chat About Brand. If you are on Twitter, that is on Tuesdays at 12 noon Eastern Time, and it's always on the exact same topic that I'm talking about here on Friday with my special guests. This week's topic is luxury branding. We have spent many shows talking about being more human in your branding, being very relatable, all of that. Luxury branding is kind of a different animal. You, of course, still need to get that resonance, but it is a very different type of relatability because you're speaking to a very specific consumer. So we're going to be talking all about that with a friend of mine from college, actually, who I'm going to talk about in just a moment. But first, we have a giveaway every week on the Twitter chat and on the live show. It is the same giveaway. It is for live viewers only. Sorry, replay viewers, we love you. Come back next week to win next week's prize. But live Twitter chat participants on Tuesdays at noon and live show participants on Fridays at noon get a chance to win a special prize. And this week, it is a very special prize. This is a beautiful beautiful piece of silver guitar pick jewelry from Chords for Music. Chords for Music is actually an incredible nonprofit that benefits music education in schools. And the reason we're going with Chords for Music this week, not only are the pieces beautiful, not only do they benefit a good cause, and I'm actually going to make a donation equal to what the profits for the nonprofit would be for each of these pieces this week, but we're also giving that away because our wonderful guest, Nicholas Coblence, is the founder of Chords for Music. And so in order to win that, live viewers only, again, you are going to type in hashtag Chords for Music. And I highly encourage you to go check out that important nonprofit as well. Okay, so as I said, we have a special guest today. And my friend Nicholas has done luxury branding for all sorts of brands. He has a brand consultancy, and he also has done a lot of work in the arts, in food, in agriculture, in the nonprofit sector. He's done it all, so he especially knows how luxury branding differs from other kinds of organizational branding. So let's bring him on. Hey, Nicholas.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome.
Hi.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us first a little bit about the stuff that you have done and your branding journey, because again, you haven't just done luxury branding. You've done all sorts of stuff. So tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked on a number of different kinds of brands, period, but I started in the luxury space. And I was helping build brands and reposition brands on the brand side. And then did a foray into the art space and the social impact space, and started sort of getting a taste for, the sort of the give back space, understanding that the work I do could impact a number of people. And so I studied that at Columbia, did a master's in that in arts administration, and then one day when I was working, after all of that, I went back into the consultancy world and worked on strategy. And I started working for luxury brands as clients who needed to understand how to better talk to their consumer, and realize that luxury brands actually can do a lot of good as well, because business can do a lot of good, period. And so my journey has been working with all sorts of kinds of brands since then. I've worked with music labels, I've worked with agriculture and farming products, luxury brands, art brands, and auction houses, always looking at how to better engage with consumers, how to be more meaningful in their life, how to be more relevant to them as the consumer, and how to then, really create that connection. So the work I do now is really aligning the brand values and the consumer values so that consumers can be the great ambassadors for the brand, and the brand can be that business that the consumer relies on, and can always rely on to help them with what they need.
Sorry, having a little trouble with my keyboard shortcuts here. All right, so that is such a really great look at branding and why it's so important and why it's so fascinating to those of us who are in that world, because it really just is all about speaking to people. So
Yeah.
let's dive into the specifics of luxury branding. First of all, what does that even mean to you? What is luxury branding?
I mean, the word luxury itself has been overused in so many ways that at this point, there's just so many ways to judge what a luxury brand is. One can say that it's about price points. Apple is a luxury brand. Peloton is a luxury brand. In the same time, Peloton makes it quite accessible when you break it down to a 3-year payment plan. So in effect, is it a luxury brand? Well, it's a very high-end brand. It's a very expensive brand if you're paying all at once. And Apple did the same thing while doing all those payment plans. But they're luxury brands when you define the price point. But then again, maybe they're as accessible to a lot of people through those kinds of payment plans. In the same
So I think
time, a
some of
lot
it
of
has to do with the consumer as well, because
well,
you
so I
think
was
of
going to say, yeah,
Peloton, they have made it very accessible. A lot of people I know who have Pelotons point out that it is less than a gym membership, and there's plenty of people out there who are not spectacularly wealthy who are spending more than a Peloton monthly payment on a
right.
gym membership, but they're not the Peloton consumer. There's like
They're
a
not.
subtle
I mean,
difference
there's
there.
also, you have to have room to have a Peloton. Like, you
Yeah,
need
that's
to
true.
live in something that's large. Like, I have a little 1 bedroom. I have a Peloton. It takes up a big part of my living room.
Yeah.
But yeah. I mean, the consumer also, when you talk about it, I mean, consumers dive into universes, right? So the Apple consumer will always be an Apple consumer because they are sold to the ecosystem and they always want to be in it. Um, and they have specific, just like exactly what Natalie said, I mean, they have specific values of their own that brands like Peloton, brands like Apple, brands like Tiffany and Chanel and all of them, a lot of beauty brands, et cetera, they speak to their values and to their beliefs. And so, when you think of, in the end of the day, luxury brands have their formula of how they've always operated, right? When it comes to marketing and brand strategy. But a lot of these brands are realizing more and more and more that they need to reach the consumer where they live,
Yeah.
right? So they need to speak to the consumer because at the end of the day, today's consumer is more educated than they've ever been, right? They know more about the product than most of the people in the store do.
Yeah.
Right, and they come in or they understand more about the reasons why that product is important than half of the people because they're necessarily not trained well enough, or maybe they haven't been living with the brand long enough, right?
I
I was
think
talking
that's
to
really key. A lot of times, the people who are selling the brands can't necessarily even afford to be consumers of the brand.
well, that's number one, and number two, being a salesperson is no longer a career,
Yeah.
right? I was speaking to a beauty brand that I was consulting for last year or the year before. Well, obviously the year before, because last year I wasn't speaking to anybody. And we were doing a presentation up in Canada, and I pulled aside the head of training and the head of all of the retail, and I said to them, "Tell me, on average, how long does somebody stay employed as a beauty advisor in one of your boutiques?" Now, there was a time when this was a career. You spent 40 years working for a store. You knew your métier very well, and you understood, because you understood consumer behavior, you understood psychology through what you learned on the job, and through everything that you learned throughout your career. And so you had your own PhD in psychology, essentially, just from doing that work. To now, you have 6 months training, and with this company, the turnover rate was 18 months. So 6 months
Wow.
and then a year. So if you think about it, when you go into a store now, if that's the case for other, and honestly, like a lot of big brands create incentive programs to keep their people in, and still, when you go to
Or they
the department
promote from
stores,
within, but still that means that person's not like on the floor.
no, exactly. And when you go to department stores, you still see careerists who work for Bergdorf, for Neiman's, for
Hmm.
Bloomingdale's, etc., but a lot less.
And
And
they're aging out
so,
too.
and they're aging out, exactly. And so, retail isn't necessarily a job that people that young people learn to do at a young age, like going to work for, the whatever in the neighborhood, the sandwich shop in the neighborhood is no longer something necessarily. I think that's as
It
valued because
feels
everything is
temporary and
digital.
it certainly doesn't feel
Exactly.
luxurious. It's funny because you're really speaking my language here because I spent the early years of my career in the beauty industry, including doing training programs. And I
Okay.
remember there being kind of this line. I mostly worked with brands that are prestige, not luxury, and kind of the line there. And also with the department stores, there's a difference between Macy's and Bergdorf's.
There is.
And so much of that difference, even though, I was with Estee Lauder and we were in both, your Macy's or even your Filene's or your
Hmm.
whatever department stores, but we were also in places like Nordstrom. And we treated them very, very differently. But, we knew that Lauder and Lancome and all of that wasn't the same as, Chanel, even. It's just kind of the different levels, and it's interesting because you got to think about where those lines are drawn. I mean, I used to be really into purses. Tremendous difference between like Coach and Kate Spade versus like Louis Vuitton. You know,
Tremendous difference in how they're
tremendous.
sold or the product, you mean?
Really in how they're sold and positioned.
Yeah.
It's price point,
Yeah.
but it's more than that. So speaking of the more than that, I'd love to talk to you about how brands get to the more than that. How does a brand get presented in a way that elevates it to that status? Two products being essentially equal in construction are not always equal in reputation or level of prestige. So what
I
are some
mean,
of the indicators there? How do you position that?
you do it by understanding, first of all, what kind of story you're really going to be telling. I mean, a lot of brands make assumptions, but they don't necessarily do the market research and the insights work to really understand their consumer. They have a history that they build on, and they have a story and a something to aspire to, or that used to be to aspire to. But as I said earlier, today's consumer is more educated than ever, and so the greatest resource for understanding how to do is to ask. Always ask your consumer. Always ask your target consumer. Don't shy away from market research. CMOs for a long time were always saying that, that market research, I only have a small budget. We have our marketing plan, but we're not going to do. Now, big luxury brands are creating entire research divisions that are devoted not only to data, because obviously today data and analytics and digital are the most important thing for a lot of brands, but also, qualitative research is incredibly important. And it's very important not to overlook the importance of qualitative research.
How do you
Talking
do
to
that
people.
research though? How do you conduct that research? Because I feel like a lot of brands, especially the higher up they are, they may feel like, well, we should be telling them, we should be the leaders. Will it make us look vulnerable if we ask them? So how do you go about
Yeah.
doing that?
Well, they definitely don't want anybody to talk about it. I mean, a confidentiality in the world of luxury is the number one rule. But you gotta be somewhat humble. I mean, when you do a focus group of 12, of not 12 people, of like 8 people, they're not going to go on Twitter and say, "Hey, I just went on to did a focus group for Louis Vuitton." I mean, you got to still ask questions, and you have to sort of get over that thing that's blocking you to understand, and you have to also know. I mean, finding the right consumer is extremely hard to ask questions too. So you got to have the right resources. You got to know who to talk to about bringing in those high net worth individuals who can give you that kind of research and answer those kinds of questions for you. And I mean, yes, you're absolutely right. Brands shy away from that because they feel like that's not who they are. But in the past X number of years, like, 10, 20 years, the world of fashion and luxury has changed completely. And I'll speak to the world of fashion because that's where I'm from, within the luxury industry. It changed completely. There was a time when the fashion industry, fashion designers, at least in Europe, always would say, I'm going to tell you how to dress. I'm going to make you something to aspire to.
Yeah, we are the tastemakers. The brands are the
We are the
tastemakers.
taste, exactly. And it's what I used to always say, and it's not just this specific example, but one example I'll give is the difference between the American model and the European model. Americans, for a long time, merchandising was having a merchandiser at your brand was essential, right? They were the ones who were talking. They were the go-between between the design team and the sales team. So the sales team would say, well, last year these tops sold really well in these colors, and the design team said, well, this is the story we're talking about this season, but let's take those models and make. I don't think, and I'm not speaking from experience, but I don't think Lagerfeld or Saint Laurent or Alaya or Gaultier or Mugler ever took market research and say, now we're going to create more, chiffon dresses because that's what sold last season. They told a story based on this, what they want, the story that they want to tell, the fantasy that they want to build, the universe they want to build. And slowly but surely, you started seeing more European houses working on that model, on that data-driven model. And so they're changing. All the brands are changing because they realize that they have to meet you where you live. Instagram is making them all change. The fact that we're all doing e-commerce is making all change. Brands are slowly coming to terms with having to sell online. Prada just recently started doing that, right?
And
they,
it
for
changes the
years,
exclusivity model, completely turns it on its head.
it does. It does, and at the same time, it's still exclusive because it's still expensive, right? So it's still something you need to be able to afford. Back to the conversation about Peloton and Apple, yes, it's more accessible, but you still need to be able to afford it, even if you're breaking down even if you're doing an Affirm account and breaking down everything. I think so it's, yeah, I'll just leave it on that, is that they're learning, they're transitioning, they're still keeping those aspirational stories. There is still ingrained in all of us I recently got engaged, and
Congrats.
my fiance and I were looking at, thank you, my fiance and I were looking at engagement, like wedding bands. And at first I was like, oh, let's go to Cartier and Tiffany and see what the wedding bands look like. And then after that, when we started looking at the wedding bands and started looking at the prices, I was like, wait, hold on, my jewelry guy on 47th Street could definitely do it for me. And I texted him. It was much cheaper, and I was like,
Gotta
well,
love the Diamond
I'd love to
District.
know. But I was like, I'd love to know that my wedding band says Cartier in it, because it does. I'll admit it. It makes me feel good to have that logo, right? Because it's on top of it's a beautiful product, and it's a brand that I do relate to in terms of my taste and my values and my sort of how I think of the lifestyle and the world that I live in.
Yeah, some people
So I
dream of
definitely
that
wanted
Tiffany
that. So
solitaire
there's always going to
slipper.
be that aspiration. Yeah, there's always going to be that aspiration, though, right? People are going to continue buying Chanel lipstick. Why?
Yeah.
Because they want a Chanel product in their handbag, not just because it's a great product, right?
Yeah.
So there's that aspiration still exists, but there's a happy medium for brands to discover how. And by the way, it's all about them. It just works for them, right? So there isn't one formula for everybody. Each brand needs to do that discovery for themselves. They need to understand how it works for what their strategy is, what their intentions are, and what they want to do, what their purpose is. And so, but brands have to, and a lot of brands are doing it, but brands have to have a deep dive into what do they want and what do they want to mean to their customers, and how do they want to engage with them, and they just have to do that study and that research.
Ooh, I
And
definitely want to
again,
dive
Peloton is a
into
great model for that, by the
I
way.
definitely want to dive into what they mean to their customers. But first, just really quickly, we're going to be doing our giveaway in just a few minutes, and that is a
Mhm.
beautiful piece of Chords for Music jewelry. If you could just give us like the quick little rundown of what
Sure.
Chords to Music is, because you founded the organization.
I did. So by the way, it's I just want a quick correction because a lot of people make this mistake, but it's actually not a nonprofit. We work with
Oh,
nonprofits, but
okay.
we're a social enterprise, a for-profit
Mm-hmm.
company. We work with at the moment at the moment we will always work with them. But I'm saying I'm thinking of expanding an incredible organization in New York City called Education Through Music that goes to the poorest public schools in New York, the hardest to reach ones, and works with them to bring music education into their curriculum, helps them build a classroom, brings a teacher, and just makes sure that children have access to music education. Every child that every child has access. So I
That's an
created this
important thing.
company.
I'm very blessed to have my kids in a school district that values the arts and that values music. Their music teacher blows me away, and it's sad to think teachers of some schools that don't have that.
Yeah, I mean, America, I love my country and I'm very proud American, but America hasn't always valued the arts as we know, and education, I'll say even less, and or maybe the arts even less, but education also not as valued as it could be. And so, I mean, the world of education needs every help that it can get. It really does. And so I started Chords to make sure, there weren't any social impact brands that were music education, other than, of course, I forget the Save the Music, VH1's Viacom, that organization, which is absolutely extraordinary. There weren't any companies out there, and they're a nonprofit. There weren't any companies out there that had music education as their core mission. There was a lot of like nice to haves and small, kind of campaigns that were based on a collection and that would last a month or two, maybe 6 months. But there was never a company, or not one that I found. I mean, there's one up in Rhode Island that does these bracelets with guitar chords from famous musicians. But otherwise, there aren't that many companies that have it as a core mission to fund music education. So I just wanted to start that, and I had some time after working with this agency that got bought up by another big agency, and I decided to step away. And I just said, listen, this is now or never. I'm going to start this business. I went up to Rhode Island. I started manufacturing up there. Decided it had to be made in America as much as possible. And I built a website with my own two hands. I was like on the phone constantly with like developer, like the
Mm-hmm.
Shopify, to say, how do I change the color of this? And
Yeah.
what's the code for that? And that was my entrepreneur's journey. I mean, I always had my own consulting practice, but I had never
Mm-hmm.
really had my own product brand,
Love it.
and never had my own, brand to position myself. And that's what
Yeah.
I did.
Well, everyone should definitely check out chordsformusic.com. They've got necklaces, bracelets, all sorts of great stuff that can help make a positive impact.
Yes,
So
ten
I want
percent
to
of every sale goes to education through music. So,
Awesome.
and we've been able to have an impact on lots of kids until now, and I'm very proud of the work. So please go and
That's
visit.
awesome. And as I mentioned, I think at the beginning, I'm going to be giving a donation so that
Thank
even though
you.
you are being very kind and donating the product, I want to make sure that we still get that money to the kids. So we have a couple questions from our Twitter chat participants this past Tuesday, and I encourage anyone who's watching right now to get your questions in now because we're going to be wrapping up in just a few minutes. But get your questions in about luxury branding. Right now, we've got one from Nicole. Nicole wants to know, where do you start when crafting a brand strategy? Like, what's the
I mean,
first thing?
right, and I gave a sort of an answer on there, but the first thing is, what does the brand want to do? I mean, it's, there's, when you craft a brand strategy for a brand, every brand is different, right? So there's no, as I said earlier, there's no cookie cutter strategy, but you have to think of, what does the brand want to do? Who are they? Why do they do this? What drives them? Brands are people, let's remember. Like, we always have this idea that, Coca-Cola company is this big logo on a building, or, Anheuser-Busch is like what you see when you go to Newark Airport. But it's not, it's just people that create products and that sell them, right? So every brand is made up of values that come from people. And so, what do those executives want for their brand? What is their goal? And then from there, you start understanding, okay, well, if your mission is to be more relevant to your customer by helping them figure XYZ, then okay, so then you start crafting the brand strategy by understanding how do you better communicate that. You talk to your customer, you bring in all that information, you align the values internally, you understand the customer values externally, and then you try to align those two values, and hopefully there's a more harmonious conversation between brand and person. But it's really about first understanding what does your customer want, because too many people come out there saying, I know the answer for all of this, but the answer is different for every customer, brand. I say customer from a consultancy perspective.
Well, brands are, of course, also, playing to the customer, and the customer's values, I would imagine, play into that as well. They have to play into the brand value, because otherwise, where are you?
Exactly,
Some
but I
degree.
mean, you'd be surprised. I mean, but in the same time, brands are built for purposes, for a reason,
Yeah.
right? So, yes, they have to play their customers, but a lot of brands don't think that way.
Mm-hmm.
They need to start thinking more that way, and they're thinking more of it. I mean, it's better now than it was 10 years ago, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, it has to be that you
But yeah,
mentioned the democratization of the internet and all of that. You sort of have to. You can't ignore the
exactly.
customer anymore. They're right there.
Nope, nope. Yeah.
So one more thing, Callie wants to know, what should luxury brands do to make sure they're relating to their audience in their marketing? Because a lot of people have this image of luxury as being kind of above. And
Yeah.
especially, again, like we've been talking about, especially nowadays, you kind of can't do that.
It's a very interesting question, and aspiration is still very important when it comes to the luxury brand, because the luxury brand still has to be something you aspire to. Understanding their raison d'être and why they exist in the world is very important. And so, speaking to them through their marketing, telling the stories, but also, and you saw this during pandemic. I mean, being able to speak to them, not just through the marketing, but how they interact with their consumer on a daily basis is important. I mean, during pandemic, we were doing some shopping and we wanted to go to one of the luxury brands, and they were only taking appointments, and you could only do it by appointment. And so you had to call them and make the appointment. And making the appointment was incredibly hard because they weren't always answering the phone, right? And they didn't have appointments for same day or for the next day. And so in the end of the day, that sort of sitting high above on the cloud idea of exclusivity of a luxury brand, honestly, they made me just not want to go there.
Playing hard
I
to
was
get can
dealing with
bite
a
you in the
pandemic.
ass.
Yes. And I was dealing with a pandemic and wanting to we wanted to cheer ourselves up by going to this
Yeah.
shop and getting something nice. And they made it harder. They made it harder. I mean, I understand why, limited number of people in the store,
Yeah.
but at least have somebody on the phone who can just pick up the phone and talk to you.
Yeah.
And I ended up finding the product by calling the shop in Paris, and the shop in Paris is actually much better at it.
Nice.
So my point is just to say is that, yes, I mean, it's a very hard question to answer. You have to continue telling your story and continuing inspiring people. And the idea, aspiration is one thing, but if you inspire your consumer, and if you show them what's possible, right, or you show them what universe you're buying into, and but you still try to speak to them at their level. I mean, a lot of brands are doing this. A lot of brands are teaching consumer values through new ways of doing it. One of the things that and it's not the same thing because it's not a product brand, but one of my favorite things to look at during pandemic was Business of Fashion. They did a great job, because what they were doing is that they were making all of they did weekly or monthly talks, or maybe every 2 weeks, and they were fascinating with some of the most important people in the industry.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, access to that information wasn't so hard to get. I mean,
Yeah.
yes, the subscription is kind of expensive. I think it was open to everybody, and then they put it. I think it was open to members, but then they put it on
But it
YouTube
can be
after.
inspiring
It can be
without
inspiring.
being inaccessible.
Exactly.
I
There are
love
ways of
that.
doing it. And there are ways of being part of the culture without necessarily having to spend a fortune to do it either.
That I think that is a fantastic note to wrap this up on, actually. And we have our winner. I want to announce our winner of a beautiful piece of Quartz for Music jewelry. Our winner is Ursula.
Yay!
Congratulations, Ursula. Please DM me with your email address and your address where you can receive a package. All right, Nicholas, thank you so much for being with us today. This was an incredible discussion, incredibly informative.
Thank you.
Really, really.
I hope I did well. It was my first, so thank you.
I can't believe that. I can't be too surprised that a Vassar alum is extremely well spoken, but but you did a fantastic job. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Tell the good folks at home where they can reach you and your consultancy and your various enterprises that you've got going.
Sure. I can be reached. So Chords for Music is chords, C-O-R-D-S, for music.com. My consultancy is culturalstrategy.co, without the M. And, you know, feel free to follow me on Instagram at @Coblence. And just my DMs are open, so just I'm happy to answer any questions. Or if you want to email me, you can email me at nicholas@culturalstrategy.co.
Awesome.
And it's culturalstrategy.co.
Thank you so much for being with us today, and good luck on all that stuff you've got going on.
It's been really fun. Thank you.
As I mentioned, I do this every single Friday at noon, and I have my Tuesday Twitter chat as well. So here's what we've got going on next week. Next Tuesday, our Twitter chat at 12 noon Eastern is going to be about accessible branding. A lot of us, especially on social media and on websites, we don't necessarily think about those with visual impairments, hearing impairments, other sorts of impairments, but it actually is a huge percentage of people who are going to be looking at our stuff when you think about the fact that some people's impairments are temporary or partial. And so there's a lot of different things we can be doing differently with our digital strategy, our social media posts, all of that can be just very small changes to us, but that can make a real difference in not excluding parts of our potential audience. And the reason we're talking about this is that on Friday, we're going to have the amazing Alexa Heinrich. Those who already know and follow Alexa know that she's the little accessibility angel on our shoulder, kind of whispering in our ear every time we post anything. Did you put that alt text on? You know, did you put captions on this video? So she's going to be talking to us about all the little things that we can do that can just really expand the number of people who we're able to reach impactfully on social media. So make sure to join us for that next Tuesday for the Twitter chat and next Friday for our conversation with Alexa. Thanks for being here. Bye.